up again and again, advocate at the state level, communicate with Governor DeSantis, communicate with Joe Gruders, let them know, not just about short-term rentals, but about preemption in general, so that we can hang on to some vestige of home rule. Anyone on the panel that wants to say something else before we answer a couple of questions? So I do have one, and I'm not sure, chime in, if the owner of a property is renting on Airbnb, are they required to pay the county business tax, and how do we chase that? How is that collected?
The county does collect from that, and I believe in 2018 they collected 1.1 million, and in 2019 1.8 million. Airbnb and the county struck a contract a couple of years ago. Prior to that, it was a debacle, and they were not getting the taxation, the tourism, anything, the surtax, but they struck a deal, and just in the last couple of weeks, I believe it is, they have struck another contract that pulls in 3 more of those large businesses such as Airbnb. So in my opinion, I sit on that TDC. I commend the staff of the county. They go and chase, they try to get what they can in order to collect. So they've collected almost $500,000 already since October. So they're doing their due diligence, what they can.
That's of course assuming that they're collecting from legal rentals, because I mean we don't know, because Airbnb will not reveal. You heard about all these lawsuits in which Airbnb won here, won there. It's not about zoning. It's the fact that municipalities say, okay, tell us who you're collecting it from, because they want to be sure that those people who are renting are actually legal. And Airbnb refuses to reveal that, and they've won in court that because they're only a online app, they don't have to reveal who their clients are. So they are submitting taxes. You have to assume they're collecting from people who are legally allowed to do it. And I do go online. When I found out my neighbor was going to go Airbnb and check to see that I can file a complaint with Airbnb about that property, because I'm sure if you let Airbnb know, or any of these, that that's an illegal rental, that they will stop it, because I think it's VRBO. They actually have a part, or is a HomeAway, in which they respect the local ordinances. So like San Francisco, which requires you have to have a certificate to be a short-term rental, they will not put your posting online unless they see that you have that certificate. So it's those kinds of things that you got to assume that these taxes that are coming in will be coming into us anyway, because those are legal rentals.
I'll add to that, part of the reason that they won in the court is because hotels do not tell how many rentals that they have either. So you can't, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So they submit all that they collect, and what they use several formulas trying to figure out how many. Then you have that 1% sales tax or surtax, you have 5% going for the TDT tax. So they can use a formula and break it down to find out how many this company has supplied. But it'd be really difficult to tell Airbnb you have to supply something when the hotel doesn't.
So I'm handing Dan, I was giving him a little advance notice. This question is, how important is it for the county to get rental records from entities like Airbnb in order to prosecute a violation, which I think Lourdes addressed. I'm going to partially interpret that as one of the ways that I know that the county will investigate whether something is being rented inappropriately, is if they have reason to believe that is the case, an indication that the property is being rented. The owners who rent their properties are required to keep a rental log. They can request the logs to see what type of rentals and what duration is being recorded in the rental logs. So that was, I guess, the question I wanted to ask you. Is that the case for the city as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, you just answered it for the county. The city's a little different, but as far as, I'm not sure if the question's about the records from Airbnb and them, because it's not a zoning violation to use the platform, right? I could go on right now at this meeting and rent my house out for a year through Airbnb. That's probably not the right platform to use, but it could be done. So just using an Airbnb or VRBO isn't a violation in itself. So I think it's important we recognize that. So it's not just who is using these or who isn't that's important, it's how the individual properties are being used. And I think that's where the value to the city specifically may not be as high for the records from Airbnb as it may be as the records from the person next door who just was looking at Airbnb and saw their neighbor's house and can show you the front of the house on Airbnb and help the city make the connection between the site and the advertisement on the site and the actual specific property. Because that's the hardest part, is matching where this property is, which property may be on the site with the actual physical parcel.
But as I relook at this question, I think that it really was aimed more at getting what you were talking about, Lourdes, getting information from Airbnb or VRBO or any of those other platforms in order to know where should we be collecting the appropriate taxes. And I think that that certainly seems to be the part of the crux of 1011, the House 1011, is to emphasize the need to have this kind of reporting and collect the taxes. There's a question here, do HOA covenants supersede state and local regulations and ordinances? You want to talk about that, Dan?
Briefly. The city's not going to regulate HOAs, so it's not that they supersede ours. They're all in place, and really what you're going to have when it comes to state, local regulations, your municipalities, and then your HOA, is that the most restrictive is basically going to apply. So if the HOA doesn't allow a vehicle to be stored on the side of your house, then that's kind of your restriction is, your HOA level. Really the most restrictive is going to win out.
As I understand it from the county, I was told that deed restrictions in HOA and condo rules can be more stringent than the county, but not less. So we can't, say for example, the county requires a 6-foot setback on the side yards. HOAs, condos, deed restrictions cannot make that 4 foot. They can make it 8 foot. So they can become more stringent, not less. So that was my understanding, is the distinction. Larry, I understand you wanted to ask a question. I need someone to bring you a mic. So, Jerry, can you take Larry a mic? Oh, Kathy's got one.
I'll hold it for you, Larry.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to address social responsibility and compassion, specifically affordability, with a somewhat different twist on this. So, yes, property values can go down if you have a house that's basically become a revolving door. But on the other hand, if you behave yourself, then nobody is going to sell that kind of a business at a price that's manageable. Taken further, if people are buying houses and properties, residential properties, for financialization reasons, i.e. not to occupy, but because it's like a stock or a bond, they are holding on to it, not to live in, but as an investment. That means that it's that many fewer units available for people to live in this community, and supply and demand, it drives up the cost of a home. And we have a dire housing shortage in the area, I think you all know. So I would be interested in passing laws, and not, whether it can be done or not is another issue, passing laws saying you cannot leave a residence vacant, okay? We all question whether there should be a short term allowed. I go further in the other direction and saying, but you can't leave it vacant. You either have to live there, or you have to have a renter, or you have to give up that property. That, your reactions to that, especially the latter part. I have a reaction.
Okay.
Identify yourself, Jill, because the camera-
This is Jill Luke from Northport, and I really appreciate you standing and talking about affordable housing. I really do. These short-term rental investors, that's exactly what they're doing, is taking houses off of the market when there's very few houses, especially affordable houses, to be obtained. That is one of the issues that we're finding in our city. We may not have the beach where all of these happy houses are or whatever, but we have a more affordable housing down there, and it's being snatched up in order to use as, business. So we're reworking our ULDC, just to let the gentleman know what South County is doing, where we're reworking the land code. And I brought up in the meeting to be able to have those additional dwelling units detached, lowering the size of them to 500 square foot. The main dwelling can be as small as 800 square foot. On every single residential lot, be able to build duplexes. If you have more than one lot, you have multiple lots, then you can do the tri or the quadplex. I am interested in bringing in container homes, tiny homes, home sharing. To me, I was telling my friend earlier, there's some ridiculous laws on the book where only 4 unrelated people can live in a house, and then in another place it was 6 unrelated people in the house. How do you home share? How would those Golden Girls make it? I mean, as we age and we get into this, families need to come back together. But if you don't have a family, you may have close contacts. And so we have to look at this home sharing. There's another affordable housing company that's risen within our city that I want them. They have built a really economical house for 800 square foot. And this sort of stuff has to be done. We have to fix this affordable housing, and actually the vacation rentals are not helping that situation.
Well, thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, hi, Chris Goglia, St. Armands. About leaving a house vacant in the city.
Thank you.
There is only one allowed use for a residential property, if you will, and that is household living. And household living, that definition has 2 parts. It's got to be occupied by a family, and that family has to occupy it for at least a week. And that's how we come up with the minimum rental period in Sarasota of 1 week. So if you have a house and you leave it vacant all year, that house is not being occupied by a family for at least a week. And the ownership group of the hotel houses on St. Armands has these 3 properties that we believe are next in line to be knocked down. And one of them for sure is not being rented at all. And I would argue that that's not meeting the definition of household living. So I like the question. Thank you.
So we have another question that there's actually 2 questions that are in some way similar that I'm going to ask Dan to answer. One says, what will neighborhood associations do in regard to owner-occupied short-term rentals? Will they be exempt for short-term rental restrictions? So that's specific to home sharing in a certain way, that the owner is present and they're renting space. The other question is similar. It says, for Dan, your code seems to be saying that if I want to rent out a room or a unit for 1 week, every week, turning it over, that's okay.
I'm going to answer the second one first. Dan Greenberg with the city. The question about renting out a room over and over for a week, every week turning it over, is that okay? I'm just going to read the definition. Well, excuse me, it's not even a definition. It's the characteristics of the use category, household living, within the residential categories. So household living is characterized by the residential occupancy of a dwelling unit by a family. Tenancy is arranged for periods longer than 1 week. So that's where in the past we looked at that as 1 week. Now we're looking at that longer than 1 week. So turning something over weekly is not permitted. They're considered to be a form of transient lodging, the periods that are ranged for shorter than a week. And that's, see retail service, sales and service, and community service categories. We're talking about commercial uses at that point, so that's the distinction. So Chris talked about the household living is really permitted in the residential zones. That's the single family. The second question was really having me speak to neighborhood associations due in regards to owner-occupied short-term rentals. Speaking out, will they be exempt? I'm assuming about the new legislature that comes out, it's to be determined. But.
It's kind of what you just answered, which is the idea of the owner is there, and they're renting space within the house.
So we have the definition for bed and breakfast, and these aren't permitted in the residential zones, but they are permitted in the downtown neighborhood edge zones. You can think of that as around Gillespie Park area, for example. And those are allowed with certain use processes, approval processes, excuse me, but they don't have to be owner-occupied, they have to be operator or owner-occupied. So you could have an owner there who owns the property, is renting it out, or you could have somebody who is living and operating the property, and essentially the same thing. They still have that ownership of the property. So they're taking care of it, and that's where we allow those in those specific zone districts, but not in the residential. And then there's the second thing.
The question that Dan was just addressing about neighborhood associations, if you draw the distinction between HOAs and condos versus voluntary neighborhood associations, an HOA or a condo could make their own decision about whether they would want to allow an owner-occupied short-term rentals. But I'm not clear, actually, how that would be addressed by the county. So that may be something we need to get more information on.
Well, I'm going to interrupt because we're running out of time. I have one thing that I want to ask Dan. We had a question about proactive enforcement. I think you covered it, that the city moves on complaints. Is that correct? Didn't you cover that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to elaborate a little, because there was one thing that I'm not sure I mentioned, and that's that, we are complaint driven because we don't have the resources simply to be going out all the time looking at properties. However, if we do get a complaint about an area, and I mentioned how when you look into these platforms, the dot, when you look at the map, may not be exactly where the house is. So we're looking at an area. We're not trying to single out that specific property, but if in our research we're finding other properties, that's where we're taking a proactive step. So if we can, again, it's very hard, and people are getting more clever. They're not showing certain aspects of the property, not telling certain things. But we're picking up what we can there.
So there was one more question that was directed at Commissioner Brody. I've handed it over with the mic. So.
It says your three categories ignores vacation rentals of 1 or 2 bedrooms in a single home, not entire property, not high occupancy. That's, if we're talking about the host, whether it's the owner of the property or the person who's renting the property, being on site, then that's what I'm calling home sharing. It's also called host-occupied rentals, but in my opinion, that is separate and different from vacation rentals. In my conversations with legislators that are moving on this issue, they never intended and don't intend vacation rental ordinances or regulations to cover home sharing. And I agree. I think that somebody that owns a 3-bedroom home should be able to rent a room out in their house without, that's the 4 corners of your house is the most protected place there is from government intrusion. And I think that they're just very separate issues. And in practice, there are so many people that are doing this properly, that are doing it and making it to make ends meet, or I've met seniors, you know, in Florida, the vast majority of people that are home sharing are seniors. They raised a family in a home, and most have since left, and they use it to supplement their Social Security or their limited income, and also to provide some social interaction. I mean, there's really a vast array of stories that I think tilt me in the favor of allowing and really defining home sharing separately from vacation rentals and letting people do in their own homes what they want with as far as rentals go, renting a room.
So one very last thing, and that is back to the accessory dwelling unit, because that was an option that was passed recently, going back to touch on the idea of trying to find creative ways to ensure that there will be affordable housing, especially in the city. So do you want to talk about what is an accessory dwelling unit and what are people allowed to do with it?
So right now we have accessory dwelling units. They're not regulated differently than any other vacation rental or home sharing situation. And I do think that I include that in host occupied or home sharing situations, where I think that the main difference is that you have someone on the property, they're self-regulating. Almost to completely, but to a large extent, they're self-regulating. You have somebody on the property, they're not going to let the music get out of control, they're not going to let the trash get out of control. And also on the other side of it, the people that are using Airbnbs, that are finding home shared situations, are, for the most part, vast most part, genuinely looking to experience the community, genuinely looking to experience the neighborhood, to visit those off the beaten path coffee shops or pizza parlors that don't necessarily get to feel our tourist economy.
But that sounds like allowing accessory dwelling units is going to direct more to Airbnb and vacation higher price rental than actually creating a space for affordable housing for people in the city that, you know, that are municipal workers, many of them, that need to find someplace they can afford. So,
and I think that it's the homeowner's decision. I think that the homeowner wants to rent the idea that somebody rents out their accessory dwelling or a room in their house 365 days a year is just not true. People that I know that do it, they do it on the weekends, or they don't want a full-time resident necessarily, but they can use the extra income. So, as a municipal government, who am I to step into their living room and tell them how long their guests can stay?
but an accessory dwelling unit is a separate unit in the same yard. So it does feel different than having somebody be in your home. So I see the intent behind it, which, like I said, was to create something small. Does it have to be under 500 square feet, Dan?
In the city, 600. I heard it from the audience. 600 square feet is the maximum size of a detached accessory dwelling.
So the idea there is small, so hopefully the rent would be low, and it would accommodate somebody who needed a low rent location. But it's probably more likely, given that Sarasota is in demand, to end up being something that could be more, more likely to be a short-term rental for quite a few more dollars.
I mean, people are doing it in some of our historical neighborhoods, like Gillespie. The houses were built like that. They have kind of a attached garage with a mother-in-law suite or whatever up above. And I think people use it however they're comfortable with. Some people don't want to mess with having people come and go and do the whole Airbnb thing, and they want to get to know the person or whatever. I kind of leave that preference to the property owner.
So again, as I said, interesting times. We plan for one thing, get another. It's still evolving. So I want to thank you all for having come and been with us and asked questions and participated. I really want to thank everyone who showed up for this panel. And Northport is a really long drive, so thank you, Jill. So I think everybody added a tremendous amount of expertise and experience and made this a really valuable panel. So thank you all very much. And don't forget to get.
And I also want to thank Melanie for moderating this and marshaling all of the efforts. She has produced a document